The performance ended. Simon Cowell sat quietly crying, his hand pressed against his heart, and he asked the contestant, "Why did you choose that song?" The answer destroyed everyone in the studio. The America's Got Talent stage was bathed in warm golden light. The audience of over 1,000 people sat in hushed silence, the kind of silence that only comes after something profound has just happened. The other judges, Howie Mandel, Heidi Klum, Sofia Vergara, sat motionless at the judges' table, tissues in hand, mascara streaked down faces. And Simon Cowell, the judge known for his brutal honesty and stone-cold critiques, sat with tears streaming down his face, his right hand pressed firmly against his chest, directly over his heart. On stage, a young man in his early 20s stood holding a microphone, his own eyes red and swollen. His name was Daniel Harper. He wore simple jeans and a plain blue shirt. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to grab attention. He looked like someone who had walked onto the stage carrying the weight of the world. The final notes of his song, a haunting, slow ballad from the 1980s, still hung in the air like smoke. His voice had been raw, imperfect in technical terms, but filled with so much emotion that technical perfection hadn't mattered. Every person in that theater had felt it. Simon's hand trembled slightly as he kept it pressed against his heart. He cleared his throat once, twice, trying to compose himself. The cameras stayed locked on his face, capturing every tear, every moment of vulnerability from a man who had spent decades building walls. "Daniel," Simon finally managed to say, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I need you to tell me something." Daniel nodded, gripping the microphone tighter, bracing himself. "Why did you choose that song?" Simon asked. "That specific song. There's a reason. I can feel it." "Tell me why." Daniel's face crumpled. He looked down at the stage floor, took a shaky breath, and when he looked back up, his voice broke on the first word. "Because it was my dad's favorite song," he said. "And I learned it so I could sing it at his funeral. 3 weeks ago." The audience gasped. Several people cried out. Heidi covered her face with both hands. Howie closed his eyes and shook his head. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth. And Simon Cowell stood up from the judges' table. Simon stopped the show. No one knew what was happening. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 3 months earlier. Daniel Harper wasn't supposed to be on America's Got Talent. He'd never auditioned for a talent show in his life. He wasn't a performer. He was a 23-year-old community college student studying engineering in Portland, Oregon. He worked part-time at a hardware store, lived in a small apartment with 2 roommates, and his biggest dream was to graduate and get a decent job that would help support his family. His family consisted of his mother, Rebecca, and his father, Thomas Harper, who had been a high school music teacher for 32 years. Thomas Harper was one of those teachers students remembered decades later. The kind who stayed late to help struggling kids learn to read music. The kind who spent his own money buying instruments for students whose families couldn't afford them. The kind who believed, genuinely and completely, that music could save lives. Thomas had a favorite song, an old ballad from 1984 called "Hold On." It wasn't particularly famous. It had been a minor hit for a one-album artist who never made it big. But Thomas loved it. He'd play it in his classroom during quiet moments. He'd hum it while grading papers. He'd sing it softly to Rebecca while they danced in their kitchen on Saturday mornings. This song, Thomas would tell his students, is about not giving up when everything feels impossible. It's about holding on when you can't see the light. Everyone needs a song like this. Daniel had heard his father sing "Hold On" hundreds, maybe thousands of times growing up. He never paid much attention to it. It was just Dad's song. Background noise to childhood. In March, Thomas Harper was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment. Thomas, characteristically, faced it with quiet dignity. He kept teaching until he physically couldn't anymore. He kept encouraging his students. He kept dancing with Rebecca in the kitchen, though now he needed to sit down after one song. "Don't you dare cry around me," Thomas told Daniel during one hospital visit. "I've had a good life. I've made music with hundreds of kids. I've loved your mother for 35 years. I've watched you grow into a good man. That's more than most people get." Daniel had nodded, throat tight, unable to speak. "But I want you to promise me something," Thomas continued, gripping Daniel's hand with surprising strength for someone so weakened by illness. "Promise me you'll find something you love as much as I love music. Something that makes you feel alive. Promise me you won't just survive. You'll live." "I promise, Dad." Thomas smiled. "Good. Now go practice that thing I taught you. The guitar chords. Remember? You're terrible at it, but you'll get better." Daniel had laughed despite himself. 3 weeks earlier, Thomas had insisted on teaching Daniel to play guitar. Daniel had no musical talent whatsoever. He'd proven that conclusively throughout childhood by failing every instrument Thomas had hopefully suggested. But his father had been persistent. "Just learn this one song," Thomas had said, his hands shaking slightly as he showed Daniel the chord progressions for "Hold On." "Just this one. For me." Daniel had practiced every day. His fingers bled. The chords sounded awful. But he kept trying because his father had asked him to. 2 weeks after the diagnosis, Thomas Harper slipped into a coma. He never woke up. He died on a Tuesday morning in May, with Rebecca holding one hand and Daniel holding the other, while a nurse quietly hummed, "Hold On," because Rebecca had mentioned it was his favorite song. The funeral was small. Thomas's former students came, adults now, some with their own children, all of them crying and sharing stories about Mr. Harper who had believed in them when no one else did. The high school principal spoke. Thomas's sister read a poem. And Daniel, who had never sung in public in his entire life, stood at the front of the chapel with a borrowed guitar and sang, "Hold On." It was terrible. His voice cracked. He forgot words. His fingers fumbled the chords. But he made it through because he'd promised his father he would try, would find something he loved, would live and not just survive. After the funeral, something changed in Daniel. The song, his father's song, had planted something in him. A need. A purpose. He kept practicing. He took vocal lessons he couldn't afford. He practiced the guitar until his roommates begged him to stop. His mother noticed. "Your father would be so proud," she said one evening, listening to Daniel practice in their garage. "He always said music finds you when you need it most." "I think I want to audition for something," Daniel said quietly. "I think I want to share Dad's song." "Is that crazy?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "No, sweetheart. I think that's exactly what he wanted." 3 weeks after his father's funeral, Daniel Harper submitted an audition tape to America's Got Talent. He sang, "Hold On," in his garage, his voice still rough, his guitar playing still imperfect, but his emotion so raw and genuine that the producers called him within 48 hours. "We want you to audition in person," they said. "Can you be in Los Angeles next week? Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this performance is still ahead." Now, standing on the America's Got Talent stage, Daniel watched as Simon Cowell stood up from the judges' table. Simon never stood up. Never. In 12 seasons of judging, Simon stayed seated. It was his thing. His power move. The judge's desk was his throne. But now he was standing, walking around the desk, moving toward the stage. The audience held its breath. The other judges looked at each other in confusion. The cameraman scrambled to follow Simon's movement. Simon walked to the edge of the stage and looked up at Daniel. His face was still wet with tears, his expression softer than anyone had ever seen it. "Daniel," Simon said, "I need you to tell me something else. When you sang that song, when you learned it for your father's funeral, did he ever hear you sing it?" Daniel shook his head, fresh tears streaming down his face. No. He went into the coma before I got good enough. I wanted to sing it for him. I practiced every day, hoping he'd wake up so I could show him. But he never. Daniel's voice broke completely. He never got to hear it. Simon closed his eyes briefly, his jaw clenching. When he opened them again, he spoke directly to Daniel but loud enough for everyone to hear. My father died when I was young, Simon said, his voice thick with emotion. And there were things I never got to say to him. Things I never got to show him. I carried that weight for decades. And what you just did, singing that song, honoring him this way, that took more courage than anything I've ever seen on this stage. The audience erupted in applause, but Simon held up his hand for silence. But I need to tell you something, Daniel. And I need everyone here to understand this. Simon's voice grew stronger. Your father heard you. Maybe not with his ears, but he heard you. The love you put into learning that song, the hours you practiced, the way you honored him at that funeral. He felt all of that. Love doesn't need ears to hear. Daniel collapsed onto his knees on the stage, sobbing openly. The microphone fell from his hand with a dull thud that echoed through the theater. Backstage, producers were begging him to continue, but he didn't. In the control room, the executive producer was shouting into his headset. Simon, we need to move to judging. We're way over time. Simon, can you hear me? We need to. But Simon wasn't listening to his earpiece. He was climbing onto the stage. The audience gasped. Simon Cowell, in his expensive black v-neck and designer jeans, was pulling himself up onto the America's Got Talent stage. Something that had never happened. Something that broke every protocol. He walked across the stage to where Daniel knelt. He crouched down beside him, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. Look at me, Daniel, Simon said gently. Daniel looked up, his face destroyed by grief and relief and catharsis all mixed together. Your father was a music teacher, right? Simon asked. Daniel nodded. Then he knew something I've spent my whole career learning. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. It's about connecting. You weren't technically perfect tonight. Your voice cracked. You missed some notes. But you were real. And real is worth more than 1,000 perfect performances. Simon reached into his pocket and pulled out a black handkerchief. He handed it to Daniel. Here. Clean up. We're not done yet. Daniel took the handkerchief, wiping his face, trying to compose himself. Simon stood and walked to the golden buzzer at the judges' table. He didn't look at the other judges. Didn't ask for approval. Didn't hesitate. But what happened next, no one in the theater, or watching at home, could ever forget. Simon slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. The stage exploded in golden confetti. The audience leaped to their feet, screaming, crying, applauding so loudly the sound was almost physical. The other judges stood, clapping wildly. Howie was sobbing. Heidi was jumping up and down. Sophia had both hands over her heart. But Simon stayed on stage with Daniel. He helped the young man to his feet, keeping one hand on his shoulder. You're going straight to the live shows, Simon said, his voice steady now, filled with conviction. And I want you to sing that song again. For everyone. For your father. For every person who's ever lost someone and wished they could have said one more thing. Daniel nodded, unable to speak, as golden confetti rained down around them. Simon pulled Daniel into a brief, tight hug, something no one had ever seen Simon Cowell do on stage. When he pulled back, he said quietly, just for Daniel. He heard you. I promise you he heard you. Share and subscribe, so this story will never be forgotten. Daniel made it to the finals. He sang, Hold On, one more time on live television, and this time he dedicated it not just to his father, but to every music teacher who believes in their students. After the show, Simon had the black handkerchief he'd given Daniel framed. It sits in his office with a small plaque. Thomas Harper, music teacher, he heard you. And Daniel? He graduated with his engineering degree. But he also started teaching guitar on weekends to kids who can't afford lessons. Just like his father would have wanted.